So good morning, everybody, and welcome to our talk on developing multilingual identity in school, insights from two parallel studies. I'm in conversation this morning with Åsta Haukås. I'm Linda Fisher and I'm from the University of Cambridge, and I'm a teacher educator, been working on multilingual identity, and so is my colleague Åsta. And we're going to do it differently this morning because we're actually going to have a conversation and we're going to have a bit of a dialogue about what we've been doing, where the similarities and differences lie. So over to you, Åsta. Who are you? Tell us.
Yes, thank you, Linda. So I'm also a teacher educator, just like you, and I'm from the University of Bergen. So both of us, we are mostly involved in foreign language teacher education, aren't we? But I have to say we're interested in all kinds of language learning, particularly in school, and also how to train language teachers to enhance multilingualism in school. And how is it then in England and in the UK, Linda, about learning languages in school?
So the situation in England is, it's not terribly promising, I must say. As we can see from this graph, Åsta, we've had rather a dip in uptake of languages. So in the secondary school, everyone must study a language in the secondary school. That's usual common languages are French, Spanish, German. You must study one of those in the secondary school up to the age of 14, but at 14 you can choose whether to continue or not. So this graph shows the percentage of young learners who decide to continue or not. And we can see that back in the early 2000s, it was quite high, about 75% of students continued with a foreign language study after the age of 14. But we can see that coming up nowadays, we've got figures here on this graph because I chose this because it was a nice looking graph. It's about 47%, it's about the same now. So it's under half of students continue with a language after the age of 14. There's a little bit in the primary school now that wasn't there before, but really the figures aren't really hugely promising. What about over in Norway, Åsta? How does that compare?
Yeah, I'm quite surprised to see those low numbers, I have to say, and also that it has dropped so much from 2002 and onward. But we actually see a similar kind of drop here in Norway. So this is from 2006 and until this year, and you can see that many more students here choose to study a foreign language. And when I say foreign language, I mean a second foreign language, because all students have to learn English. So, but still around 75–76% learn a second foreign language in addition in lower secondary school. So that would be pupils who are around 13 or 14 years old. Mm-hmm. Many more actually than in England.
That's promising, isn't it? So you've got really high numbers, even with a second foreign language in Norway. So yeah, it is quite starkly different, isn't it?
Yeah, but still we are worried because you see it's dropping now. So we hope that next year we won't see an additional drop, because then there will be a very similar tendency that English is enough. Yeah. But that's a similarity between the countries, that kind of you can get around everywhere with English. So why should we bother to learn a second foreign language, or a first in your case?
And I think that probably is contributing to the lack of uptake in foreign language learning in the secondary school. And I think part of that dip came when, for a while, learning a second foreign language to 16, the age of 16, was compulsory for most students. And that's why we had quite high numbers learning it. But then when that was removed, we can see that drop in motivation. People just don't see the point in carrying on with another language and tend just to drop off and not continue with their studies. Which I suppose brings us to why we were both very interested in the topic of multilingual identity and the identity thing, because we were interested in trying to understand why people want to learn languages, why they don't, how they see themselves as a language learner, because we both think that that's actually really important, don't we, in motivation towards carrying on with languages study. So we both decided to do our projects, didn't we, on this topic?
That's right. So let's go on then and talk a bit about our projects. And I think I have to say I'm really grateful to you, Linda, and your team, because you invited me and my team in. And kind of you are the mother of the project that we have done a parallel study in Bergen. Could you tell us a bit about your projects over in the UK and England?
Sure. So if you see over on the right-hand side of the screen there, it says we are multilingual, and that was the project title of our project. We decided to work on multilingualism and multilingual identity, particularly actually. And we wanted to investigate how multilingual identity develops when you learn a foreign language, and whether you can indeed help students to develop the agency to say that they are multilingual, because we sort of hypothesized that that might have lots and lots of benefits for language learning. And our project was part of a larger project called Multilingualism, Empowering Individuals, Transforming Societies. And that was a really large scale project with researchers, an interdisciplinary project with researchers from literary studies, sociolinguistics, cognitive sciences, all working on multilingualism, a certain angle on multilingualism. And we were the education strand, and we were very interested in identity. Went out into lots of schools and had a look at how children identified, and then whether we could work with teachers, as I said, to help them to think about their multilingualism. Over to you, Åsta. What sort of things did you do?
Yeah, so in Bergen, I'm the head of the research group Multilingualism on My Mind. I have multilingualism on my mind all the time, and we're interested in what extent other people see or think that they have multilingualism on their mind, so if they are multilingual. And in particular, this project Ungspråk, which I think is kind of a parallel project to the one in Cambridge. We look into teenagers, so 8th graders in schools, multilingual identity, but also their multilingualism. How many languages do they think they know? Where do they use them? What do they think of language learning? And in particular, then an important question, do they see themselves as multilingual, and how do they define it? So now we've been talking a lot about multilingual identity, but I think we need to also say what that is and to define it so that we have kind of a common ground here. Linda, could you help us out, please?
So yeah, well, first of all, it's not hugely, I mean, identity is a complex thing, isn't it, Åsta? I'm sure you find that as well. It's really quite tricky to research identity. So what we did, first of all, was to try to think, what is this multilingual identity thing? So we had a look at, obviously, there's so many researchers who've done fantastic work in multilingualism, and we're standing on the shoulders of so many giants, including Britta Hufeisen, who should have was going to come to talk today in our seminar, and Ulrika Jessner, all these people, Ronin, all of these people have worked in multilingualism, and so we drew a lot on their work. And then we looked at all the identity scholars to try to think about how linguistic identity was being researched. So all the wonderful people working in identity, such as Bonnie Norton and all her colleagues, and so many others, David Block and so on. And then we tried to bring all this together and think, well, how can we research this then in schools? What are the tools that we can use methodologically? How do we frame it? How do we theorize it? And there were lots and lots of things coming out of that. And we produced this paper where we tried to bring it all together, to think about all the theories of identity and how, therefore, we can operationalize it in the classroom. And that led us to try to sort of come up with some definitions. And so we came to the idea that multilingual identity differs a little bit from linguistic identity. So linguistic identity, I suppose, is the way you identify, or the way you're identified by other people in each of the languages in your repertoire. So maybe as a speaker of French, I might have a particular identity when I use that language and when I converse in that language with other people, or in one of my dialects, maybe even as well. But multilingual identity is sort of more of an overarching, we think of as an identity. So this is how you construe yourself as someone with all of these different things in your repertoire. So it's overarching, and therefore it might actually be a tiny bit more stable than some of the identities that sit underneath it, because I could think of myself as multilingual, and that won't shift necessarily, but each of the languages underneath might shift slightly. So my competence or my confidence in certain languages might increase or decrease, but I could still construe myself as a multilingual, because I've got lots of different pieces to my repertoire. And for us, I don't know about for you, Åsta, but I think we're on the same page on this. We would say that everyone is multilingual, actually. We take the widest sense of that term because we think that everything contributes to multilingualism. So be it, reading signage, emojis, any dialect and so on you've got, any language that you've learned to whatever proficiency, that all contributes. So we would see everyone as being multilingual. Is that something you would agree with, Åsta?
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get back to that a little bit later on. But thank you for clarifying the term multilingual identity and also for writing about this in your article. I think that was of great help to me as well, to kind of all those thoughts about identity and clarifying how we can see it. And I agree with you that it's perhaps more stable than what, for example, our other linguistic identities and other identities can be seen. But so we think identity and to identify as multilingual could be important to all of us. But what about school curricula? Can we find that approach or something similar in the curriculum? Oh, sorry, I have to. Yeah, we forgot about this one.
Yeah, well, this slide is just a few of the reasons why I suppose we both decided that we wanted to focus on this topic, isn't it? Because once you start to research, you start to think, well, if people could get this more stable identity, then it could actually lead to lots of positives, couldn't it? So we think about all the languages people have in their communicative repertoire. And when we've got a lot of people in our schools who speak lots of different home languages, for example, and maybe we know that we don't valorize these minoritized or marginalized languages very much, certainly in school. Maybe this would be helpful. We could make people proud of all the languages in the repertoire. We could raise their visibility in school as well. I talked about how you might have more stability in your identity as well. And this might help you invest in language learning in the future. So for example, if you do have some attrition in some of your languages that you have at the moment, you might think, well, you know what, that's okay, because I am a multilingual person. I'll pick that up again later in my life. I'll go back to school later. I'll go to an evening class. I'll pick it up, and that's okay. It makes you think more long scale, more long term, rather than right in the immediate future. Oh, I can't do it. I'm no good at this right now, but in the future, I might be better at it. And we know that language awareness has lots of benefits for literacy and oracy. So that might be a good thing too, that the more aware we are of our linguistic repertoire, that might actually help us, might learn better. And also, maybe just thinking about this together in school might bring better cohesion. I mean, we might empathize better with newly arrived students, for example, with all sorts of other people in the world that we encounter. So those were some of the reasons that we sort of thought that we might want to focus on a multilingual identity.
Yeah, and that leads us to the curriculum. Can we see this parallels in the curriculum in England?
So I think in Norway you're doing a lot better, but we'll hear from you in a second. I think in England it is, I suppose we could say actually it's rather monoglossic, the approach to our classrooms. It's very much about studying the one foreign language. In some ways you can see it, if we get so little time to study a foreign language in our context in England. Some people will have like 2 hours a week. It's not really very much. So the focus is very much on getting proficient in that one language. So you can see from the aims, it's all about, increasing fluency, writing well in the language and so forth. But there's no space really for bringing in other languages, for example, for any translanguaging pedagogy. There's no space for that, certainly. Overall, there would be reference to sort of other cultures a little bit and so on, but actually when you come to look at it, there doesn't seem to be a lot of space in the curriculum for it. So what about in Norway, Åsta? I think you're bringing in some new ways of working in the classroom, aren't you?
Yeah, we've got a new curriculum lately, and I was quite happy to be part of a group planning the contents of the curriculum for foreign languages and also the core elements. What are the most important key ideas for the curriculum and in the curriculum? And this is something I really like, that is from the core curriculum for all subjects, namely that knowledge about the linguistic diversity in society provides all pupils with valuable insights into different forms of expressions, ideas, and traditions. all pupils shall experience that being proficient in a number of languages is a resource, both in school and society at large. Isn't that nice?
It's lovely, and I'm so glad that you had a hand in writing it. Congratulations. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, it's not me, I have to say that. This is the general one, but something similar also in the foreign language curriculum. But this thing that all pupils shall experience, that it's a nice thing and a good thing to be proficient, and that it is a resource to them. And also the word identity is mentioned several places in the core curriculum. And if we take a look at some of the subject curricula, for example, in English, we also see that there are competence aims that are a bit different from the ones you showed us. So, for example, explore and describe some linguistic similarities and differences between English and other languages he or she is familiar with, and use this in his or her language learning. So here we see that this contrastive approach and the language awareness part is an important part of learning English.
Yeah.
And then in the modern foreign languages, so that will be French, German, Spanish, and so on, there is also a core element, language learning and multilingualism, where it is stated that the more languages you know, the easier it gets to learn languages, and that it's important to be aware of all the languages you know in your repertoire.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm quite happy with that, and the same thing also for the Norwegian subject. But on the other hand, I would say that for people with not Norwegian as their first language, the picture isn't that beautiful as here. So that kind of, they say in the curriculum that learning your home language is a resource, but kind of implicitly until you have learned Norwegian. So you are offered in many schools instruction in your home language, but only until you are sufficiently proficient in Norwegian. So it's kind of a mixed message here, I would say.
Okay, that's interesting, Åsta. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. But overall, I would say that the term multilingualism and identity has come into our curriculum.
Well, it sounds wonderful. So I wonder, therefore, you've got this paper, Åsta, haven't you? This is a wonderful paper as well, actually. So you've published on this as well, and this is about actually looking at, well, you're about to publish it. It's coming out in the book very soon, and here you write about who actually thinks of themselves as multilingual, don't you? So can you tell us a bit more about that? How do people or young learners in Norway construe their multilingualism? Would they say I'm a multilingual or what?
Yeah, I think this is a bit problematic also in our research field, because we walk around here at the AILA conference and everywhere, and we talk about multilingualism. So have we done so far in this talk, but we haven't really defined what it means to be multilingual. What does it take? How many languages do you need to know? How well do you need to know them? So who are the multilinguals? And my impression, and that's what I'm writing about in this chapter, is that scholars in Norway tend to call people with immigrant backgrounds the multilinguals. So they are the multilinguals. And others, so let's say people born in Norway who learn German and English in school, they are not referred to as multilinguals. And I think this can be problematic because there's kind of a discourse that the multilinguals are the ones we need to help. They have some problems that we need to solve. So the multilinguals are the ones with problems, instead of multilingualism being a big resource for everyone and for all pupils in school. So I fear that this way of talking about multilinguals can lead to also pupils not seeing themselves as multilingual, and that chance of identifying as multilingual is missed by the pupils. But the good news is that we checked this in our Ungspråk project. We asked the pupils to define what does it mean to be multilingual, and thereafter ask them, are you multilingual? They could answer yes, no, or I'm not sure, and they should also explain why they said yes, no, or not sure. And we were quite happy to see the results. This is the question was answered by 593 pupils, and in all, 66.8% of the pupils said, yes, I am multilingual. And so that's quite a high number and much more than what I had expected. And this percentage was even higher among pupils with immigrant backgrounds, as nearly 80% of them said that they are multilingual. So that is a bit equal to this discourse in Norway that immigrants are the multilingual ones. But nevertheless, if you only look at pupils without immigrant backgrounds, they are 65%. So 2/3 of the pupils would say that they are multilingual. So
pretty encouraging.
It is really encouraging. So I'm happy about this. And the ones who said they aren't, they were often insecure about how many languages you need to know to be multilingual. And very few of them said, it's because I'm born in Norway. So kind of, I'm Norwegian, so that's why I'm not multilingual. But this notion of a multilingual being someone with immigrant background was not a main reason. What about you in England, Linda?
So in our project, we also asked the learners to identify as multilingual and to tell us if they felt that they were multilingual or not. And I mean, this brings into all sorts of complexity, doesn't it? Because how do we as researchers also view them as multilinguals? How do we get a handle on whether they, we would ascribe multilingualism to the learners or not? So, and Dee Rutgers is going to talk in a little while in depth about this project and about some of the ways that students identified. But if we look at this bar chart here, it represents a scale that we asked learners to put themselves on a scale, where 0 was sort of very monolingual and 100 was very multilingual, and they were to sort of put a little marker on it, because we wanted to do an intervention and then to see if there was any change in where the marker went, and we could monitor change sort of, very precisely and so on by doing that. So this bar chart shows us a little bit about how people would identify themselves. Now, all schools, I'm sure it's the same in Norway, in England, have to log students as either being English as an additional language learners, EAL, or not in their records. And so what we did was, as one of the measures, was to have a look at how people put themselves on the grid according to whether they were designated as EAL learners or not. And so if we have a look at this chart, we can see how people are saying whether they're multilingual or not. The first thing to notice is that more people are pushed towards the left-hand side here, which is very monolingual, i.e. they wouldn't say that they were multilingual at all. So we can see that it's skewed that way, rather than in the Norway data, where we had well over 50% saying that they were multilingual. We're not getting that at all. But we can see a difference, can't we? So the people that schools said are not English as additional language learners, i.e. don't have any home languages at all, these people were much more likely to say that they're monolingual. Whereas the people that would traditionally be seen as the multilinguals, i.e. people who have got other home languages, they were also more likely to say that they were multilingual. But it wasn't always an easy divide. So some children said, yes, I'm, really pushed themselves to the end of the multilingual scale, even though traditionally we would maybe have ascribed them as not being multilingual. We would have said, no, you're not multilingual. So for example, some children who just learned a little bit of French in school put their cross over at the end and said, I'm multilingual. And we said, why? And they said, well, I learned a little bit of French in school. And they thought that allowed them to say that they were multilingual. And we thought that, that's, in our mind, that's fantastic, because it's a mindset, right? It goes to a mindset of being proud of your repertoire, whatever that might be, and being prepared to say, yes, I'm a multilingual. And that equally, people who did have rather a number of languages sometimes said that they weren't multilingual. They would write down, oh yes, I've got this language, I've got that language, I speak it at home and so on. And yet they would not put the X anywhere up at the end of multilingual for lots and lots of different reasons. Just as you say, sometimes they didn't feel that proficient in languages, or they didn't know what counted and so on. And so they were much more likely to say, oh, well, maybe not, I'm not sure, I'm going to push myself over here. And that brings us to the whole thing of thinking, well, maybe we need to talk to students more about what it means to be multilingual, and to help them understand that if they want to claim that label, then that's okay.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. But before that, I would really have liked to ask you, why do you think there's such a big difference between the Norwegian pupils and the English pupils? Because your pupils have, all of them also learned a foreign language for a few years, haven't they? Just like ours.
Yeah.
But still, there is a big difference. Most of mine, no matter what kind of backgrounds, they would say yes. And actually much more of yours would say no, or a very little degree. What do you think? Why is that?
Well, I suppose it might be what you talked about before, Åsta, where everybody's got English in the Norwegian context. Whereas, and so everyone feels, I mean, I'm surmising, you can tell me in a second, rather confident about one language, don't they? One additional language to their Norwegian language. Whereas in the UK and in England, people don't feel confident at all. So even if you've got a smattering of a language and you've learned it for a few years, as I said before, you've got very few hours in school, I just think they don't feel confident saying that contributes towards multilingualism. So I've got even colleagues who speak rather good languages, and I've heard them speaking their languages, and they would still resist that label of multilingual because they don't feel they're really good at it, they're really proficient. So I think it's a lack of confidence probably in our context, whereas maybe a bit more confidence in your context. What do you think of that?
Yeah, actually, I just talked to a colleague the other day. She's a professor in French, so even professor, and she said, I would not call myself multilingual, and she's also lived many years in the United States, so I was a bit surprised by this. So it's a very high threshold for calling yourself multilingual. But yes, I think you're right. The thing that we have all English kind of under our skin, it's everywhere, and we learn it from the first school year, makes us quite confident that at least we know and understand two languages. But if we only were to answer based on the French and German and Spanish we learn in school, I think that perhaps the numbers would have been more similar to what you have. But I think we have to go on now, Linda, and talk about what we should do then to support all pupils in school to see themselves as multilingual and help them become a multilingual identity. What can we do?
Yes, well, I think it's really important to develop some sort of a pedagogy for identity competence, multilingual identity competence. And so what we tried to do is to try to see if we could put together a package of materials for the classroom, theorized as well, from everything we understand, and then sort of run an experimenting. We did an experiment in classrooms where we had a control group, and we had several groups working in different ways on this pedagogical material to try to help people well get as I said, that agency. The more I understand about multilingualism, the more I can reflect on it for myself, then perhaps I will be prepared to identify myself as a multilingual person. So I'm going to show you a couple of things that we did. So
and
really
I just want to say to everyone that this wonderful material is available for everyone to download, so you can have a look and you can use it just the way it is, or you can adapt it to your own context.
That's right, absolutely. It's all available. So we've got we first of all started thinking about what does it mean, you know, what could a repertoire involve. So it was trying to get children in classrooms to think about what could constitute a linguistic repertoire. So that was a really helpful thing, first of all, because we got them to put themselves on the scale and then think about it in depth, and then see if they change their minds or whatever, because they can see all these other ways that that you could be multilingual. And then we decided we also wanted to open it up a little bit. So I know that in Norway, people speak a lot of different dialects and so forth. And does a dialect, what counts, you know? And so it's just opening all of this up. Who are you as a speaker? Which dialects do you have? What sort of accents do you have? How do you use language in different contexts, and so on? And then importantly, we got people to reflect on all of the information that they were getting in classrooms. with regard to themselves. How does this affect me in my life and so on? And we found that that reflexivity angle was really important, because we can give lots of information to people, but how to shift identity, you have to actually do something with that. You have to relate it to the self, and you have to do lots of reflection activities which really make it pertinent to your own context and to your own life. And so anyway, we've written that up also in a paper, and that's the effects of the intervention on people's conceptions of their multilingualism. And we did find that with reflection and with this input on language awareness and sociolinguistic knowledge, that people's conceptions of themselves as multilingual definitely did change. And so that's a paper where you can read all about that. But I think you did something similar, Åsta, didn't you, with helping students to think about what constitutes multilingual?
I think it's so important what you said, that it isn't enough really to say, go into a classroom and say, congratulations, all of you, you are multilingual, and then list up a number of reasons. You have to kind of interact with it and think about yourself and explore what does that means to you. And we did a similar thing visiting one of the schools. We couldn't, because of the pandemic, we couldn't visit all of them. But this is something Andre will talk about, Andre's daughter, in a later talk today, but how to make them look into all the definitions that they made themselves and how they felt about them. And we made some prompts for them to think even more about the definitions that they had made all together. And I would also say that our article about how we developed our questionnaire can be useful for everyone, including teachers in school, to work on students' multilingual identity. So in this article here, you can also freely download our questionnaire, and that can be used in the classroom as a starting point for reflecting on the learner's multilingualism and multilingual identity.
Yeah, really useful, Åsta. That's a fantastic tool, I think, that people can use. Definitely.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
And it's great also if people would use this one in other contexts for research, to see not only from the English and the Norwegian perspective, but also from other contexts. But I think we have reached the end of our talk now, Linda. So what are the implications of our work in this field?
So we've got 3 things up here, haven't we, Åsta, about policymakers needing to think about this and need to, maybe modeling what's going on in Norway, bringing in the multilingual turn into policy, into educational policy across the board, but also in languages education, right? And then teachers need to do something as well, Åsta.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think it's quite important that the word multilingual and multilingualism and identity come into the curriculum in white papers, and also that it's defined so that people don't automatically, for example, think that it's only about immigrants, for example. I had a talk 2 years ago for teachers. It was an open day at university, and very few came compared with what normally would come. And then some of them come up afterwards and said to me, oh, I didn't know this was for all students. I thought it was only for immigrants. That's why people didn't come. So we need to make clear that multilingualism is something is relevant for all. And then the teachers, you said something about this, but they need to do something.
Yeah, agree. I think we need to make space in our classrooms. I mean, even though the curriculum is so full at the moment, and certainly in our context, it's very, very full in those couple of hours a week. But if we don't make space for this, then it's not helping the children to actually understand what we're really trying to do with them in the classrooms. It's worth the time of actually carving out some space to think about this, to think about who I am as a language learner, what it means to learn this particular language, and also therefore how that adds to my repertoire. And unless we're doing that sort of thinking and helping them to understand how everything fits into a bigger picture and how it fits into their lives, then I think we're not helping them to become little, users of language in the widest sense as they go through their lives.
Yeah, and of course that leads us to this last point, that teacher won't do this if they don't know enough about it, and they haven't been prepared for it in teacher education. So we have to take responsibility here as teacher educators to prepare our students, teachers to do this, to see themselves, I think, as multilingual, and that they have a multilingual identity, and also how to use various materials and approaches to support the development of a multilingual identity in the pupils as well.
Yeah, absolutely fundamental, Åsta. I think that's right. Teacher educators, when teachers are at the beginning of their career, when we've got them in our context, but also ongoing. And I think there's a lot of work to be done with teachers out there at the moment who are quite hungry for these sorts of ideas and this sort of thinking. But I think that's right. We have to get the teaching body. We need to work with them, because I mean, our teachers in our project were so interested in this and really wanted to be involved and wanted to help make materials and so forth. So I think harnessing that energy is a really, really good thing to do going forward.
Yeah, that's my impression too. They are interested, and like you said, they are hungry, but they need to know and how to do it and get some more ideas, and we could do it together.
Yeah.
So, Linda, I think our time is out, but if you would like to know more about our project, read about what we are doing, download materials, please look into our websites, and you can know more, or you can read our articles. Thank you all then for listening to our presentation.
Thank you, and thanks, Åsta.
Thank you, Linda. I'm still on the video here, but let's see.